All right, good afternoon, listeners, and welcome to another episode of PW Grocer's Environmental Echo. I'm your host and CEO and president of PW Grocer Consulting, Paul Boyce. I want to welcome you guys. As always, we're bringing a very interesting and timely topic. We're going to be talking today about the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or otherwise known as the CLCPA. With its good intentions, it may have some more difficulty than initially thought in rolling it out and implementing it, but we're going to dive into some of these topics. We've got a great guest today. We've got Alita, who is a partner at the Albany-based law firm of Couch & White. That's a firm we've been working with for a few years now, and I'll vouch for them and speak very highly of them. We've enjoyed the relationship we've had over the years and look forward to some more interaction in the years to come. But Alita is the chair of the firm's environmental and land use group and works with energy, construction, and real estate development practice groups across the state, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
And in her current position, she represents commercial and industrial clients that include operators of solid waste management facilities, mining, asphalt companies, railroad operators, developers. Oh man, the list goes on here. And a variety of renewable and other energy projects, as well as governmental entities. She's well-versed in New York State's Environmental Quality Review Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, Brownfield Cleanup Program, Solid Waste Management Facility Program, and other local, state, federal environmental regulatory programs. All impressive. But before we get into this, the one thing I do want to let our listeners know, if you guys are interested in getting a hold of us, best way to reach us is through our website, which is www.pwgrocer.com/podcast. We've got a great team back there that is looking forward to hearing from people. If you guys have ideas, thoughts, or comments you want to share on any of the topics, or maybe some topics we should be thinking about in the future. And I also want to introduce another guest who's a repeat offender, as I like to call him, from our firm. We've got Chris Amskog, who is a senior vice president, and he heads up our environmental compliance group back at the office. And I'm looking forward to hear his thoughts on the CLCPA as well. So welcome, Chris and Alita.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. So let's get started. Alita, given your position with Couch White, I'm sure you do a lot of work associated with New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Can you tell our listeners, what that is and how it impacts our region?
So in 2019, New York enacted a law that is pretty simple in what it requires, but has incredibly far-reaching consequences. This law requires a transition to carbon-free sources of electricity, mandated as renewable energy, with 100% by 2050. And we're supposed to be, I believe, at 40% by 2030. There's also supposed to be a total of 85% net of the 1990 levels of carbon in New York State, which would be achieved by reducing carbon sources from everywhere between transportation, industry, electric generation, and it calls for electrification of many resources that do emit greenhouse gases today. So I think a lot of people don't realize that this law not only is going to require many, many regulations and additional laws, but it is going to impact everybody from a single person living in an apartment to the biggest company in New York State in what they will be required to change in their lifestyles to accommodate the electrification goals, the reduction in transportation and emissions, and other issues like that.
So in my mind, we do a lot of this type of work. We're familiar with it. Sounds like the intentions are good, correct? I mean, what's your feelings on that?
So, yes, reducing pollution is always good because when you reduce emissions of greenhouse gases as well as other pollutants would be reduced with that. Encouraging, I would have liked to see the law encourage innovation in addition to saying, hey, renewable energy, why don't we encourage the development of other carbon-free technologies and, incentivize that as well. But diversifying the grid is a good thing. Encouraging economic growth is a good thing, but there are a lot of challenges to accommodate this law, both on the development of the renewables and electrification, and also the impact on the permitted community, which one component of the CLCPA that is tucked into the back, literally, of the law. It's Section 7 of the bill that was passed. It's not in the law books. It requires every agency to consider the impact of any decision or permit or contract that they issue on achieving the greenhouse gas emission reduction goals of the CLCPA. That's Section 7, Subdivision 2, 7.2, we call it. And then there's a second provision that says, that focuses on disadvantaged communities, which is another component of this law of making sure that from the environmental justice side of permitting, that you consider if a facility is unduly burdening a community. Section 7.3 requires every agency approving any kind of registration, permit, contract to consider whether the project will unduly burden a disadvantaged community. So agencies have these mandates to address in addition to overseeing transforming New York State into an electrified, renewable energy-powered state.
One of the things that I've
Chris,
seen,
I was going to ask. Go ahead.
although the intentions are wonderful, the rollout and, let's say, direction to both local and state-level regulatory agencies has probably not been as strong as it could have been. There's a lot of confusion in different agencies regulatory agencies about how to adopt some of these rules and regulations, how to look at applications when they come in, how to approve permits. And so we're seeing on multiple levels confusion. And people at the lowest levels who are reviewing these things, they want to play by the rules, and they just are not sure how. And so it is leading to significant slowdowns in regulatory review process. And in some places, just dead stops. So where agencies are afraid of making the wrong decisions, so they are just holding off on making decisions at all. And so it is causing issues on projects, development projects, and even renewal of certain permits.
You're getting where I wanted to go with this stuff.
So
yeah.
Again, it's well intended, but the rollout is leading to some confusion across the state.
So once we add this layer to, say, permitting, how is it affecting the approval process? How much longer is it taking? Is it slowing things down? Is it helping?
So I think that especially on the disadvantaged community analysis component, it is brand new. The climate law required it formed many working groups, and Climate Action Council and the Climate Justice Working Group was tasked with deciding what characteristics make a community in New York State a disadvantaged community. Those characteristics and mapping were not completed until just over a year ago. So once that happened, the Department of Environmental Conservation hit the ground running with requiring these analysis with no guidance. So in projects I've had, a lot of times they say, here's what we're trying to do. They have just adopted a guidance in final in the past month or so, but that is still fairly broad. And I have to say, to Chris's point, that's not necessarily, the agencies are trying to flesh out how this is supposed to work, because Section 7 itself does not give factors. It does not give like a pass-fail. It says, do you unduly burden a disadvantaged community? Is this project inconsistent with, but it doesn't say how. So the agencies have to figure that out. And, I think they're worried about getting it right.
Yeah. And that vagueness of language also opens it up for anyone who wants to oppose any type of project. It makes it vague enough where they could do it and say, based on these sections, we think this is inconsistent, and it does bring a project to its knees and stops things. And the disadvantaged community mapping is also another thing that I think needs to be looked at. We're seeing some of my projects, they're considering places in Southampton, East Hampton as disadvantaged communities. So is it really having the intent that it's meaning? The way it's being mapped out is another thing that should be looked at in a little more depth.
So Alita, we in your bio, your intro, you work with a lot of different industries and a lot of different types of clients. Which ones do you see this impacting the most right now?
So they started with air, which makes sense given that those are permits that authorize releasing pollutants, including greenhouse gases. So many industries need an air permit. For example, an asphalt plant wouldn't necessarily need a DEC permit, but they would need an air registration or permit for the emissions that come off of the plant itself. Many factories and operations, a landfill would have an air permit depending on the equipment at a mine facility. So DEC started there with a guidance document on how to evaluate the greenhouse gas emissions. So those have have already been going on for a few years, and you see a varying response in the different regions. Some want to see an analysis so that they can see it, understand it, move on. Some, it's becoming quite a cumbersome process or a delayed process.
Chris, what about you? I mean, which of our clients at PW Grosser are you seeing this impact?
We initially
immediately like this.
We initially saw it with a lot of the mining clients. They have generators and things like that require permits, and so there have been other legal issues about some of those sites. But so that's almost caused DEC to look at CLCPA as a rationale to hold off on renewing permits or issuing permits. So we're seeing it there. Some of our hospital clients
I was going
are
to say our healthcare provider clients,
who are looking for, having to do with secondary power generation
Yep.
for emergency. They're starting to see it. Some of the sites that we've had in the city, having to do with their energy generators. So those are some of the first clients that along with mining, like you said, the asphalt facilities as well. Those are the three that I've had the experience of getting hit first with kind of how to address this.
What about the overall energy sector? I mean, trying to keep up with this and electric generation and.
They are, I have a client that will have a Title V renewal coming where, yes, even for a longstanding facility in compliance, I think it's important to stress that this is an ability to shut down even a compliant existing facility. If they find it's not consistent and it cannot be mitigated, they'd say, we're not renewing your permit. And then you're in court fighting about it. So those will be coming up. The air permits have 5 to 10 year terms.
Correct.
And so as they come through, I do want to note that other industries, every single permit that DEC issues, every single registration or minor modification, they would have the authority to require this analysis. They can, and I assume will soon start requiring it for solid waste permits, not just the air component, for mining permits, because the Section 7 requirement is for all permits and approvals. Now, I think they're trying to ease into it, and they're starting probably with select facilities where they see it as more of a relevant issue, but they also have another commissioner's policy that says the other groups are going to start, and there's a list. It's not every single permit, but they have a pretty exhaustive list of other subject areas where they will start requiring CLCPA.
You get my mind racing with things, but something you just touched on, and thinking about these agencies, specifically the state, we have a tough time with stuff that's not related to this, to getting it permitted and approved because they have a lack of staff. Do you see this being impacted also or do they have 100%. To staff up to meet this?
They would need to staff up, but the reality is, through no fault of their own, there's been a lot of retirements. Mm-hmm. And as we know in our industries, finding people is difficult. In the, government side, they're struggling as well to get people to come and work. So I think even if they had every seat filled, they're still being given so many mandates that it is really slowing things down on their end, because they can only do so many things with the people they have.
Chris, what have you seen?
We see certain areas of the state being affected a little bit more by staffing of, let's say, some of the DEC agencies. Long Island is one of them where, but again, we see it in private industry where finding engineers, some, even entry level and a few years under your belt is a very difficult thing to do. We were looking for air engineers, in our firm for years. It took us about 5-6 years to start to find some bodies we could pull in. It's so some of these things that they're requiring, even if you had the entry level bodies, learning the skill set is still also taking years. So it's going to be a tremendous challenge to let's say keep allowing development, keep allowing infrastructure improvements, keep allowing even things like alternative energy development. It's getting caught up in some of these issues. Because at the permitting level, there's a general staffing shortage that we need, and we see other things going on with agencies like DEC, with some of their wetland requirements that are going to be rolling out next year that is just going to be very intensive as far as internal permit reviews at that level, and so there is an overall industry concern about, right now for certain permits that could take 6 months to a few years, what's going to happen going down the line in a few years? What is this going to do for getting projects shovel in the ground? Is it going to be now a 5-year, once the project is thought about, is going to take 5 to 10 years before construction starts, if it starts at all? And so it is a concern for a lot of industry through the state. And again, the biggest groups I see as being construction, energy, infrastructure are probably the main groups that are going to get hit by a lot of these rules initially. And obviously those costs and the delay of those projects will filter down through everything else through the state.
You know, we talked about some of the time frames here, being it 2030, 2040, yep. 2050. You know, what are some of the real obstacles to implementation and meeting these time frames? You know, statewide, I see it being epic. I mean, we're no longer going to be able to buy brand new gasoline-powered vehicles in what,
in 2035.
2035, you know,
that's
coming up. Oh, man.
But yes, the implementation problems, the controller noted that in addition to the large-scale renewables, that the pace of development, even with smaller scale, which community solar has been an area that has been very successful, and Chris and I have worked on a number of projects together.
Yeah.
That even with all of that, it's going to be at least 3 years past the deadline, assuming everything keeps up at the pace that it's at. And I think we will discuss some of the challenges that are slowing this down, not because there's a lack of interest, but because of the hurdles that are being run into in New York State. As far as the host of regulations that the legislature said, DEC, NYSERDA, PSC, enact all the regulations that are necessary. That was supposed to be done by the beginning of this year, which, even if that was their only project, would be incredibly difficult to accomplish. One of their major programs that they're looking at, Cap and Invest, it's still being developed. They've done 2 rounds of public outreach. There's going to be a host of other regulations needed in order to carry out the mission of electrification, which again is everything from this building, if it doesn't have heat pumps, would have to transition to that. If you're using the wrong kind of refrigerant, you're going to have to use a climate-friendly refrigerant. All of the construction and electrical infrastructure to electrify every vehicle that is going to be parked here, let alone for larger industries, which are going to have to electrify for equipment that doesn't exist yet in the construction world, in the trucking industry. Yeah. They just don't exist, and certainly not at market scale.
I just have a hard time imagining an electric bulldozer. You know, it's just
you joke. A lot of
I'm not. I'm like, I can't even think about it. The batteries would look like.
But a lot of our clients are looking for the heavy trucks with electric heavy trucks, electric heavy equipment, and even if they wanted to buy them right now, there's a multi-year wait on trucks, and then in addition with the trucks, if they do want to implement their fleet into electric vehicles for trucks, the supply to even power, if they were able to find the supply of trucks and bought them tomorrow, and we represent some bus companies as well.
Yeah.
They'd like to go that way. They don't have the ability to power up those vehicles, even if they were all parked in their lot. It's a supply chain on both the equipment to do the work and basically the supply of energy or electrical in the electric grid to address it. And we also have supply chain at some of the solar farms and community solar that we are involved in. My clients are, getting approvals to get site plan approval to develop these, but basically they're saying the equipment, if we wanted to do this tomorrow, it's going to take us 2 to 3 years to even get the panels to do some of these projects. So, and that's things that they've been planning for a few years. So there are supply chain issues on the equipment and the materials, and then back-end supply chain on the design and the infrastructure to support the electrification of the grid as well.
And that's the thing. One of the CLCPA's components was to create a scoping plan through one of those programs where Governor Cuomo and the legislature on each side got to pick a few people to sit in this round table essentially and come up with how do we get there. And one of those requirements, discussing the electrification, they found ultimately after the comment period that in order to electrify everything, we're not just talking about replacing the grid that's here today with renewables, it has to be at least double. So we have to provide at least twice as much electrical power. And that's the thing. How is a school going to put a substation in next to their bus garage? Because that's what we're talking about with the kind of power draw. You know, it's one thing for a construction facility to have something like that, but, you know, places where you either have your community or there's children around, you know, in order to feasibly provide this, I don't think that we've answered those questions yet.
Well, let me ask you something sort of on the back end. Let's just say somebody doesn't comply or meet these goals. What are the penalties? Are people going to get fined? Are they going to get put out of business? Is someone going to go to jail? What could happen?
So in this way, the CLCPA is like the Clean Air Act. It has a deadline and a requirement, but it does not have an actual punishment or penalty in it. However, if there was a regulation that said you must electrify all buildings over 25,000 square feet by whatever year, which I think that's already on the books from a statute, and DEC has a regulation, they would be given the authority to enforce against you if you did not. And those penalty amounts have not been set yet because there aren't regulations to carry out these efforts so far.
There's like you totally answered it for me. There's no enforcement. There's no repercussions established yet for, again, because we still have a few years to get there, and maybe there will be something by the time we get there. But it might incentivize people if they knew what was coming.
True, but if you're faced with $30,000 to put electric equipment in your home or a $5,000 penalty, which one are you choosing? But that's the scale
Very
of
good
it.
point.
You know, would they go to individual homeowners who are supposed to electrify their homes, who are supposed to get rid of their gas furnace and their stove eventually, even if we've kicked the can on it today, let alone purchase an electric vehicle and have some means to charge it?
You know, you're bringing up an interesting point, getting down into the residential level. You know, I've said it on the show before. I drive a great big truck that's basically got a hole in the bottom of the tank driving around. My house is heated by oil. I've got conventional air conditioning units there, or for central AC. It burns a lot of electric. So Joe homeowner, this is going to affect them as well.
It is, and I think that Governor Hochul is already starting to be protective on that front. This year, she made a number of statements about thinking about the costs while recognizing the law has to progress. The law does contain kind of a relief valve. The PSC can say, all right, either for reliability reasons or because the cost is just too high for the average consumer, they can pull back on these requirements. And at the same time that that's going on, the NYISO is also maintaining the reliability of the grid. We've already heard them speak to shutting down some of the peakers to say, no, you're not doing that yet because next summer, New York City would start to face brownouts if they shut off those peakers. So they can't risk the safety of people that need power to cool their homes to be able to live their lives.
This is just like, again, the mind's racing, and let's just say we all wanted to be good New Yorkers or citizens of New York, and everybody wanted to comply, and everybody lines up for a heat pump or a geothermal system. There's no way the industry could supply and install
absolutely
statewide, let alone even further than that, so region-wide, these types of systems in the time frame, unless we really, really ramp up.
The scoping plan talks about that too, that as of, I think it was the end of 2022, it was due. And it discussed that, for example, electric cars, 3% of the registered vehicles were electric cars. So you needed to have X number of hundreds of thousands per year added to meet the goal. Same with electrification or changing over buildings to, electrified units, compliant HVAC. That would be hundreds of thousands of businesses. That's just the business side. Homes, hundreds of thousands of them as well per year. And it is an opportunity for economic development. But yes, to get the infrastructure, the people, the companies to do this is going to be a massive undertaking.
I think it's going to be a massive challenge.
Yes.
Yes,
because they have the opportunity to sell their goods. So those businesses could start today if they wanted to. And NYSERDA offers many incentives to try to lower the cost to the consumer a little bit, at least. But you're not seeing swarms of new companies on these issues.
No, there's no massive migration because some of the supply chain. And again, it's going to start with, design professionals designing it, and then permitting and approvals, and then contractors who can actually do the install if they can get the proper equipment,
Yeah,
materials.
equipment, whatever, down to pipes, like I said, the heat pumps, to electric panels on jobs we're waiting over 12 months on now. 12 to 16 months right now for electric.
And then looking to put things like battery storage in certain communities so you can store the electric when it's available. That's running into moratoriums in certain towns, throughout the towns and throughout the state. And we're seeing, much the same way wind energy, although it wanted to go, it's slow to kind of get to the starting line.
Chris,
so
you're bringing up some good points that, not that I want to get away from the CLCPA, but Couch White does a whole lot of other good stuff that I do want to talk about. You mentioned some of these alternative energy. Folks, if you guys are interested in reaching Alita after hearing from her on the podcast, they do work throughout New York State. That's Couch White up in Albany. Alita, do you want to mention a website or a phone number or anything you want to share?
Yes, I can be reached at 518-426-4600, and it's www.couchwhite.com. You'll find email, photos, bios, everything you need to know about us there.
Awesome. Thank you. This is the Environmental Echo of PW Grosser, and I just want to thank our listeners for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed everything. And that's all, folks. Thank you for joining us on this episode of PWGC's Environmental Echo. You can download and listen to this episode on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or by visiting our website, www.pwgrosser.com/podcast. For more content like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode.